All right, everyone, I think we'll kick off for this morning. We'll admit individuals as they hop in this morning. So first of all, good morning, everyone. My name is Wes van Deventer. And welcome to ShopCare's webinar on critical risk management and governance presented by Terry Johnson. We are pleased to see you all here with us and appreciate the time taken out of your schedules to attend, as we believe this topic is on everybody's list. Let's just start going through some of the formalities today. This webinar session is recorded for further learning opportunities. Please be considerate to the presenters and ensure to mute your microphone. If you wish to turn off your camera, please do so. Then, very important, guys, please make sure your name is displayed properly, as it's very difficult to take attendance or follow up with people if the screen name is something like iPad or just a number, or possibly you just put your first name like Jeff. There could be like several Jeffs on here. You can rename your screen by just clicking on the three little dots in the right-hand corner, select rename, and then type in your name. Catherine Ross from ShopCare will monitor the chat function. Make use of this function if you have any questions for Terry or any one of the ShopCare team. At the end, after the questions in the chat function, at the end of it, please, if there's any more time, we'll open up the lines for any live questions. And then lastly, there will be 4 poll questions during the webinar, and we would appreciate engagement and feedback. Note, all questions and the results posted live are anonymous, so please feel free to answer them honestly. So before I kick off, I'm just going to hand over to Liz, the CEO of ShopCare.
Thanks, Wes. And look, I'd just like to support in what Wes just said about thanking Terry. This is the 4th in a series of 4 webinars. They've all been the same. And really want to thank Terry for your help and support of ShopCare, Terry, and for your time in doing these webinars. And I know the people that have been coming to the webinars, we've had some fantastic feedback from them. So there'll be a lot of people doing lots of different things because of the time that you've taken. So thank you, Terry. And thank you everyone for attending today. As we said, and ShopCare is thrilled to bring you this webinar. Critical risks are such an incredibly important topic, and we have had fantastic feedback from the prior sessions. And the majority of people that have attended previously have said that they're going to do something different as a result of attending this webinar. So that's very fulfilling from our perspective. ShopCare is the Peak Health and Safety Association for retail, supply chain, manufacturing and transport. We provide leadership in the industry. We provide resources, webinars like this. We answer lots of questions around anything really. So if you've got a question that you need an answer to around health and safety, then please get in touch. And a lot more. So please check out our website and our LinkedIn page. Please feel free to follow us or connect on LinkedIn. Thanks. Wes, I'll hand back to you.
Hi guys, quick one. For today, please do not use any of the shared screens or something. It's just chat function because someone tried to share the screen just quite recently, and so you won't be able to see the presentation. So I just want to confirm, can everyone see the home slide that we're trying to share, critical risk management and governance? Just a quick yes from anybody. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right. So we'll kick off. And a quick introduction from one of the areas I'm focused on. So one of my ShopCare work streams are on critical risks and controls, specifically within the retail, manufacturing, supply chain and transport sectors. The work stream has several subfocal areas, and to give you a brief overview what I'm doing in this space. So I've created this a bit of a slide as a brief one. We had to start somewhere from a critical risk point of view when we're looking at industry. But, you know, because we had a very limited view of what's going on in our industry. So we reached out to several businesses to lean in to ShopCare's vision and purpose. We gathered several of the critical risks and controls from businesses across the sectors. So the first view of the industry of the critical risk was identified, and opportunities to leverage became apparent and what to do next. So the second part of that one is we are in the final stages of an industry-focused critical risk document that will provide valuable insights across all these sectors. We are, as I said, this will hopefully be public in the next couple of weeks, so please look out for that. Then Next, we know there is some really good work that's being done in each business, but the problem is it's kept in silos and no one outside of that business knows about the good work that is being done. So in the spirit of saving lives and making safety anti-competitive, we launched what we call a critical risk and controls sharing sessions. What it is just an online event I host, and I invite participants to a session. Each session has a particular topic, for example, so hazardous substances. Then the aim is for some of the participants to come as speakers by sharing their experiences of a particular topic around hazardous substances, and other participants get to learn and lean in, engage, and connect with others. There's no real preparation required for these sessions. In essence, it's basically what is the critical risk problem you're trying to solve, what is the solution you used, how you went about it, and what was the outcome. So far, we have done about 6 sessions, and we have another 3 planned for the rest of 2021. So next, the series of work is where we are currently now, and that is creating awareness on the importance of preventing critical risks of occurring and assisting with the facilitation of critical risk management and governance webinars. So trying to promote as much as possible. Then critical risk management, what that is basically for us, it means bow ties. So for those who don't know what a bow tie is, its simple definition would be it's a visual process of a business takes to identify critical risk and mitigation controls. We are developing these sessions where we will invite industry members to co-develop these and make them available to all of businesses. So from there on, we will use those bow ties and information within those bow ties to collaborate and develop then hierarchies of controls, resources that yet again will be shareable with the wider industry. These will assist the user when conducting their risk assessments and identifying possible controls. And then lastly, on the slide is that we have partnered with the AA Motoring Company to develop a light passenger vehicle driver safety program resource. This resource will guide the user to the why, what, and the how when planning to introduce or wanting to add to their current driver safety program. Topics like telematics or training, gravely, leadership, engagement are addressed in this document. So in a nutshell, from a critical risk and controls perspective workstream, that is what I'm currently doing in this area. So as mentioned in the beginning, we have 4 poll questions, and I'm going to start off with the first poll question. And Catherine will be launching it. First question is, guys, how often are critical risks and controls reviewed in your workplace? Presuming critical risks are reviewed in the event of an incident. This is only a single choice, guys. You have an option of 5 choices, either annually, every 2 years, every 3 years, never, or be honest. If you don't know, you don't know. Give you a couple of seconds to answer those.
About 50% participated so far, Wes.
Excellent.
Just give it another couple of seconds there. Okay, I think I'll end the poll there.
Excellent. Can we just have a quick look?
Yeah, just share those with you now.
And what do the results say, Catherine?
So the majority are showing up as annually, which is similar to what we've had in the past, with some in the every 2 years and some in the I'm not sure, I don't know bracket, but the vast majority, 70% in the annually.
Awesome. Great. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for participating in the poll. So guys, today we have the opportunity to hear from Terry Johnson to talk about critical risk management and governance. What does good look like? So Terry has led health and safety strategy and governance for the national and international organizations like the Warehouse Group, where he's currently at, DuPont, and clients for Simpson Grierson, which places Terry in a pretty good position to talk about today's topic. So thank you, Terry, yet again for making yourself available, and I'm handing the floor over to you. Terry, on mute.
Oh dear, how many times has that happened to us all in the last however many months? Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for attending the session. This is the fourth one of these that we've done, as Wes alluded to, and certainly I've enjoyed presenting these sessions, and in doing so, it's made me reflect around my own journey in terms of critical risk and governance, and the focus for me around looking at critical risk and where critical risk came from versus kind of our old hazard management thinking started around about 10 years ago, or just over. In fact, at that stage I was leading health and safety for Woolworths supermarkets in Australia. So we had around 600 stores, around 120,000 people. And we realised that the model laws were changing in Australia, and of course the Health and Safety Act over there changed before the HASWA Act came in New Zealand, and they were moving to a different focus around management of risk, and they were starting to create this thinking around critical risk versus sort of hazard management. So you know, across that time from that sort of 12 years ago through to coming back into New Zealand, working with Fonterra, where we had a really strong focus around critical risk under our health and safety leadership of Nicole Rosie, who went on to lead WorkSafe and is now in fact the Chief Executive of Waka Kotahi, where we really started to look at the critical few, but understand more around not just how you manage that critical risk, but also what governance process looks like. How do you create assurance? How do you create confidence within your organisation that you are doing the right things? So it's been you know, a continued journey for me. Wes mentioned I spent some time running a consultancy business with Simpson Gresham, one of New Zealand's largest law firms, and through that time I got the opportunity to spend time with other organisations and worked with a number of boards around what does it look like from a board perspective. What's if the directors have obligations around due diligence, what does that mean in terms of understanding the critical risks in the business and what good governance looks like from their perspective as well. So also work with some leadership teams in that role as well, and then through to my role here at the warehouse, where I'm getting to put into practice all the things that I used to preach as a consultant as well. So it's been a long journey, and hopefully today I'm going to be able to share some of the insights and knowledge around that. Some of you will probably may know everything I'm going to talk to today, and hopefully for you it confirms what you're doing. For others, maybe you're a little earlier in your journey, and I'm just hoping that you'll take some things away that are going to be useful. So that's certainly the intent of what I want to get done through this session. Agenda there, I'm going to really quickly talk about the law of critical risk management, what good can look like, critical risk governance, and then we'll have some time hopefully at the end for a few Q&As. I can see there's a few people on the call who I do know. There's only one camera on, but I can see the smiley face of Bruce Cooper there. So lovely to see you, Bruce. Probably not too far geographically from me here in Hamilton. And there's a few other names, Shane Sanders and a few other people that I certainly know. So thanks a lot for attending, everyone, and let's get into it. Thanks, Wes. So look, I'm not going to spend too much time on talking about the duties under the Act, or the Act. Sorry, I've just minimised my screen. Let me get back to you. We all know what the primary duty of care is under the Health and Safety Act. You know, we've got responsibility for our workers. Sorry, the responsibility for our workers, and which is a broader group than just our employees and our activities and other people. And so when we think about the obligation around that duty and how it applies to risk or hazard, then clearly one of the things we need to focus on are what are the things that are going to significantly hurt people. And I think one of the things that HASWA's done for us is it's focused us in on more around a primary duty of care in regards to what reasonably practicable is in terms of these critical risks as well. And I'll try and explore that a little bit more as I go through this session. Thanks, Wes. I think most of us are aware of the penalties under section 47, 48 and 49. And when the Act came in, there was a lot of focus around the responsibility on officers, officers being members of boards and chief executives. But of course, there's also responsibility for workers and for the PCBU as well. And these numbers really started, I think, that the fines increasing started to create a view from the boardroom and from the executive team of organisations that, hey, we have to be a bit more serious now. We have to actually really truly understand what is going to get us in the position where we could actually be creating an offence under the Act. And that's what's driven a lot of the behaviour in organisations to get more over critical risk, and also to understand how do they know that the things that they are trying to manage are being managed. And again, we'll kind of explore that as we go through. So what can good look like? Well, organisations need to identify and understand the risks which are most likely to cause serious harm or fatal event. And I often talk about, for me, this journey's been about moving away from what we used to think of as hazard management, more into this critical risk thinking. And I remember in the early 2000s joining a large organisation, multi-site organisation, and going and visiting one of the site locations and meeting the site manager for the first time, and having a conversation with him around safety. And he was extremely proud that he had over 2,000 hazards in his register. Now, this was a large manufacturing site, but he had 2,000 hazards in his register. And I remember thinking at the time, how on earth can you realistically manage 2,000 hazards? And how do you actually know that at any given time, on any given day, that those hazards are being managed safely to the point where people aren't going to get hurt? Well, the truth is that at that point, under the old Act, what we were doing was we were identifying everything and trying to manage everything, and we were really struggling. And when you look at New Zealand's history in occupational health and safety, we know for a long time we weren't reducing the overall number of fatal events that were happening. And certainly when we look at the numbers for a long period of time that have come up through ACC around work injuries, same thing. There wasn't significant decrease. And it was because of this sort of shotgun approach around trying to manage everything. So instead, what we have to focus on are those things that are much more significant, and identify and understand those risks which are most likely to cause serious harm or a fatal event, hone in on those, and be absolutely clear around what we're doing to prevent those from causing harm. So really quickly, what does that look like? Well, first of all, identifying those risks and ensuring we've got the controls to prevent them. Wes mentioned bow ties earlier, and I'll talk about a bow tie or bow ties shortly, but it is about having control plans that absolutely demonstrate you've got the capability and the processes in place to ensure harm doesn't happen. We also need a process for assessing that those controls are in place and are effective. And again, if I kind of hark back to hazard management, and a lot of organizations still use these kind of hazard management processes where we'll say, well, here's our hazard and these are our controls. And then how do we effectively know that they were working? Well, if we had no injuries, we used to say they must be working. Well, of course, there's plenty of research that says, a lack of incidents is not a presence of safety. And that was why we were sort of kept getting sucked into this false sense of security in New Zealand under the old Act with trying to manage hazards, because we didn't have ways of actually assessing controls and truly knowing whether they were in place and working correctly. I am generalizing a little bit. Some organizations were probably more sophisticated in their approach, but generally that was the case. We also have to now effectively monitor our critical risks. So how many events do we have? How many health and safety events do we have associated with a particular critical risk? And we should also be actively monitoring our progress on implementation of controls. When we look at our critical risks and we look at the types of controls, often these are or should be higher order controls to ensure a critical risk isn't going to harm someone. This is where we're talking engineering controls. They often require capital spend or change over a period of time. Therefore, how well are you actually going around implementing your control and your change? Touch on that a little bit as we go. And then, of course, investigate near misses involving critical risks based on the potentiality, not the actuality. So, if we look at traditional health and safety methodology, the approach to traditional health and safety investigation has been we wait for something to occur, and often we'll ignore the near misses and near miss. We might record it because we're really good at recording near misses, but we don't actually look at that near miss to understand its whether it had high potentiality or not. And so it'll be investigated in a minor way. With critical risks, anything that happens that's associated with a critical risk should be thoroughly investigated, because that is your opportunity to learn and ensure that it doesn't become an actual event at some point in the future. Where's
All right, so yeah, so we've got a second poll, guys, popping up. Catherine, can you assist? What are the roadblocks within your business to improving critical risk management and governance? Please note this is a multi-choice question, so you can select all that are applicable.
It should be on your screens now.
How are we tracking?
Give this one a little bit longer, Wes. We're just about 50% at the moment.
Sweet.
Just give a few more seconds there.
Excellent.
And I think we'll stop the poll there. I'll just share the results with you. So quite a wide array of results.
Anything that's standing out, Catherine, on your point?
Yep, so there's quite a significant percentage at 70 in the time management area. Also financial resources, frontline leaders and workers are also highly represented in the results.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Back to you, Terry.
Thanks, Wes. So I want to just take a step back a little bit here and just talk about the difference between risk and hazards and what do the two terms mean. And as safety professionals or as people leading organizations, what do we need to think about in regards to the differences between the two? And this is a model I've been using for a number of years, but essentially those risks or the risks that we have in our business are the things that in theory we have that are present and create the threat of harm to our people or property. And a risk can have an identified generic control plan. Whereas a hazard is when one of those risks has actual exposure. And I'll talk through a couple of examples shortly, hopefully that makes some sense. But a hazard is where we have actual exposure to that risk. And when we have a hazard, we should have some kind of interim control, because clearly if there's an exposure, then we aren't managing the hazard, or we haven't got the hazard or the risk under control. So, very often in our organizations, we have things that we just have to live with. We can't eliminate all our risk if we think about the hierarchy of controls. I'll use the dairy industry because I'm pretty familiar with that. And to turn milk into milk powder, we have to have high pressure steam running through evaporators and dryers. Now, high pressure steam, when it sits within the pipes and the vessels of your process, is completely safe. But it is a risk because it is high pressure steam. It's very hot and it's under pressure. Now, that only becomes a hazard if you have a steam leak, if you have a valve gland blow or a flange blow or some kind of process and you have high pressure steam leaking. Now you've got the potential for an exposure, and therefore it's a hazard. So really, and this is the way I've often thought about hazard management, often ties in with maintenance, because often your list of hazards and things that sit on hazard lists are actually things that have been reported because they're broken or not working properly, whereas in truth a hazard is actually a risk that's out of control. So it's really important that we keep thinking about our risks. What are the things that could hurt people that may turn into exposure, and then manage them as a hazard if there is exposure, but trying not to think of all of the things that sit at that hazard level across our business, because a lot of them won't actually tie into critical risks. Another example is, working at height. Many organizations, particularly construction, but others, have a requirement for people to work at height, electrical, linesmen, or those sort of roles. You can't necessarily eliminate that. You try and control it through processes, procedures, safety equipment, and other things. So, whenever someone's working at height, you've got an exposure. Working at height sits as a risk within your business because you can't eliminate it, but it's not there all the time. It's only a hazard when someone actually is exposed to the risk. So it's just important, I think, for us to keep thinking about what do we mean by hazard and what do we mean by risk. Thanks, Wes. I'm just going to quickly talk through these pyramids. These have been around for a while, and I'm sure you've all seen them before. And our thinking's changed around health and safety, reduction of incidents, and towards critical risk. And here's why. The pyramid on the left shows the old thinking around safety being a ratio of events with fatal at the top, and for every fatal event you'll have a certain number of serious harm events. Below that, lost time injury medical events, first aid, near misses. And in theory, what we were trying to do sort of through the 80s and 90s in safety and early 2000s in safety was reduce the base of the period through hazard management, try and stop all those little things happening, and we reduce the size of the pyramid, and therefore we wouldn't get to the fatal event, or we wouldn't get to the serious harm. And in truth, that happened to a certain extent. And we would see organizations go for very long periods of time with little or no injuries, but then they could often have a serious harm and a serious harm or a fatal injury. We were trying to reduce the size of the pyramid to avoid injury, but that actually led us into a false sense of security. And in fact, newer research, which started sort of occurring in the 10 to 12 year period, in the last 10 to 12 year period, and it's been sort of proven, if you flick over now, thanks Wes, is that in fact, when you look at the bottom of the pyramid, only 10 to 15% of any of those events would have led to serious harm and or fatal events. Therefore, you need to start focusing in on that critical few as opposed to trying to reduce the base of the pyramid. And again, this is why a lot of organizations, some with great outstanding safety records, I think back to being in safety in the 90s and the 2000s, where you'd see companies say, we've taken 60% of our lost time injuries, we've reduced them, and really thought, and we're at tertiary level in the ACC accredited employer program, really thought that they had safety nailed, and then they would have a fatal event, because the two things don't correspond necessarily. Reducing injury rates does not correspond with having safety in place that will avoid a fatal event, and that's what catches people out. So why is it important? It's important that we recognise the things that are most likely going to lead to that serious harm or fatal event, and it's important that we focus our activity and effort in the right areas. So critical risk management, what does it look like? First of all, it's important to identify those critical risks, determine the controls, then we review our controls, and then we monitor. So I'm going to step through each one of these. And in terms of reviewing your data, you'll have your own health and safety information. What are the things that are causing your organisation to be concerned about the safety of its people? But it's also important to look across your industry. Just because it hasn't happened in your business may not mean that it doesn't happen in your industry or can't happen in your industry. And certainly, that's the direction from WorkSafe and the legislation sort of points to, looking outside of what happens to you and knowing your industry as well. Focus on things that could cause fatal or life-altering injury or illness. Then it's about determining the controls. Can you eliminate the risk from the business? If not, then what are you going to do to try and minimize? So kind of hierarchy of control thinking, but really trying to understand around the efficiency and the effectiveness of the controls through the use of a control plan, a bow tie or similar. Then it's about reviewing controls. How do we know that those controls are actually in place? What does good look like? And again, if I think back to hazard management, kind of processes previously, it wouldn't be unusual to read a control as training, and when you dive down into that, it wouldn't necessarily talk about what the training looked like, how you know it was effective, what the frequency of the training should be, etc. And this is all stuff that needs to happen in critical risk management. We need to be clear around those controls, what good looks like, and how we'll know that they're in place. And you're using that control plan, whether it's a bow tie or something different, to actually assess governance, to provide assurance from a governance perspective around how well you are managing your critical risks. Create actions for any gaps that occur, and then monitor the process. Thanks, Wes. Just in terms of that first step around identifying your critical risks, review existing and event data, knowledge of your business, as I said. And in terms of your top risks, there might be many, and you need to assess to determine the significance of that, and then look at the events that sit underneath the risks. I'll just try and explain this a little bit. For us here at the warehouse, when we looked at our supply chain processes and our logistics business, we identified traffic management within our distribution centres as being a critical risk for us. However, if we had have just tried to manage traffic management as traffic management, we really would have struggled to point our finger at exactly what we were trying to do, because it's very, very broad. So to bring that down into manageable chunks, we said, what are the events that concern us underneath that risk of traffic management? And we came up with 4 events on our DCs that we said could constitute an event under the title risk of traffic management. They were a forklift versus a forklift versus a person, forklift versus a truck, or a straddle, because we have straddle carriers, versus a truck. So those were the 4 risk events that we looked at. When we actually then took those 4 events and we did a risk analysis around them, we said there were actually 2 that we were most worried about. One was a forklift versus a pedestrian, and the second one was a straddle versus a truck. We weren't too worried about forklift versus forklift because ultimately our forklifts are speed monitored, they are governed, our drivers are wearing forklifts, and if they were to come into contact whilst it would make a heck of a noise, we felt that the speed wouldn't be significant enough for serious harm or fatal injury to occur. People might be shaken around a bit, but not necessarily seriously hurt. So that was just a way for us to decide what are the risks we were going to focus on rather than traffic management as a large kind of topic, and start to hone in on the events that sit below the risk. Hope that makes sense, and I'm happy to take any questions on that later for clarification if people want. Thanks, Wes. In terms of sort of the developing or determining controls and developing our control plans, there is a bow tie. I'm not sure how many people have seen bow ties and understand them, so I'll just really quickly talk to them. And I just want to be really clear, you don't have to do bow ties. They are a method of visually displaying your control plan, and certainly most people, when you take a bow tie and put it in front of them and show them what it is that you're trying to do and what the bow tie does, helps explain to them how risk management works and how controls work. So with our bow tie, our event sits in the middle, and you can see the event-based controls, pointing to the box in the middle. That's a description of the event that we'd be trying to manage. On the left-hand side, we have our potential controls. So the very left-hand boxes we'll talk about, are our threats, my apologies, causes, potential causes. So they would talk about, if it's traffic management, we're talking about a forklift versus a pedestrian. It could be an unqualified driver. It could be, person not walking within the designated walkways, whatever the potential causes might be. And then, of course, for each of those threat lines coming into the event, we then nominate our controls. So if you look at the model in front of you, and if you look at the very top potential cause, you can see that there's 5 potential controls to stop that cause from becoming an event. On the right, and I'll come back and talk to that shortly. On the right-hand side of the bow tie, what we have is our potential outcomes. In this case, for us, it would be things like a fatal, serious harm, loss of productivity, it could be reputational risk, could be prosecution. So those are sort of the outcomes that we nominated. And then what we have here on the line that leads to the potential outcomes are mitigation controls. What are the things that, if the accident does occur, could then potentially mitigate that outcome from being the worst it could be? Sometimes they're called recovery controls, and it depends on how you apply your thinking around your bow tie. If I use an example, which I think kind of makes sense to most people. If we think about vehicle safety, motor vehicles, open road driving, and if our event that sat in the middle of our bow tie was a motor vehicle incident causing serious harm or causing injury, then one of our potential causes, could be impairment. And then something that could sit on the control line might be pre-drive testing, or it could be monitoring. So trucks, they have the monitoring systems to make sure people are not showing any sign of impairment, including fatigue. That could be a potential control. But on the right-hand side, in vehicles, you might have things like airbags, crash mitigation, self-automated braking. So it depends on what the purpose of the control is as to where it sits on the bow tie. If we think about airbags in cars, they're not a prevention control, they're a mitigation control. If you think about other things, and crumple zones in vehicles, the same thing. They don't stop the crash happening, but they hopefully stop it from becoming a fatal event. So they sit on the right-hand side of the bow tie. So you can do the same thing without having to draw a bow tie. So you can still just use tables and other things to develop control plans. It doesn't have to be in a bow tie type template. Thanks, Wes. When you've developed your control plan, then it's important to do that assessment, as I talked about earlier, on how effective those controls are. And the great thing about having a bow tie as a template is you can sit down and do desktop exercises where you're reviewing the controls with groups of people, groups of operators, maybe management, depending on what the risk is and at what level you're trying to manage it, to determine what controls are in place. And I'll just show a really simple example here. This bow tie has 38 controls on it. You might assess that there's 8 that aren't in place. So you've got an 80% assurance across the bow tie and across your controls. Now that's just one simple way of showing compliance or safety assurance measure to your leaders or to your board around, how much control you've got over this particular risk. It doesn't account for any weighting of controls, or it doesn't sort of say some controls are more important than others. And when you get into really complex bow ties, or when you're working in petrochemical or mining or real high risk businesses, you probably would put weighting around controls, and you may have different factors there. That's quite complex, and certainly is worthwhile looking at in those other industries. But in my view, for most of us, when we're talking about simple critical risk management, not weighting of controls is not that important. You can quite simply use this as a way of measuring compliance. Thanks, Wes. So risk review process. The first question you asked was, how often do you look at your critical risks? And I think most of you said yearly. A few people said 2 years. A couple of people said don't know. I actually recommend that critical risk programs are reviewed every 2 to 3 years. And that's dependent on the organizational risk appetite and also the level of risk you're carrying, what you do. However, obviously it should be sooner if there's a significant event occurs in your business, in your industry, or if industry practice changes. So the expectation wouldn't be that, if you'd done a review around critical risks and you had a control plan that was 2 years old, and you had a significant event, WorkSafe would kind of expect that if there'd been any industry change between the 2 years that you had done your bow tie, and now that would have been picked up and you would have actually reviewed it because of the significant change in the industry. So that's an important thing to remember as well. And each bow tie should be reviewed to ensure any new or updated controls that are required to put in place. Sometimes even in the only the 10 years that I've been involved with looking at bow ties and looking at control plans, often when you do a review 2 years later, you kind of go, actually, you know what, I'm not sure that control really does provide us the level of risk reduction we think. Maybe it shouldn't be in there. Maybe it's on the wrong line. So they do change, and they do change over time. And each time you do that, you should recomplete a gap analysis on how well those controls are in place and what your compliance level's at as well. So there's sort of two parts to that risk management review. There's the control plan itself, its effectiveness, the control plan itself, its thoroughness, and then also its effectiveness. So I've talked about critical risk management. So then what does critical risk governance look like? So, for our officers and our companies, our board and CEO, leadership teams need to be assured that critical risks are being managed, and that needs to be achieved through sort of three key processes. The critical risk reviews, which is, assessing the control plans, as I've kind of covered. And then the other part to that also is near-miss reporting and investigation, measured specifically against your identified critical risks. And I talked about this a little bit sort of up front, but I want to come back and just spend a couple of minutes on it now. One of the things that I most often saw when I was going into organizations as a consultant and looking at their safety programs was a real lack of clarity around how often something was going wrong with a critical risk or something they knew was significant. They would have great near miss reporting, and they'd be very proud of how many near misses they would have, but they didn't do anything around trying to analyze those near misses to understand and cluster them towards critical risks or events that frequently occurred, to try and see if that was associated with a major systems failure. So I can't overemphasize how important it is to really understand, when you're doing your safety reporting, understanding how many things are occurring that line up with a critical risk, and being sure that you're doing enough to prevent those incidents from reoccurring. The third part of it is just around assurance reviews. So I use the word assurance reviews rather than audit, but essentially I'm talking about some kind of safety audit that includes a check on critical risk controls as part of the process. So I'll cover that off a little bit now. So in terms of critical risk management and reporting, I'm just showing a couple of graphs here that I use here at the Warehouse Group, just as examples. I'm not saying they're the best by any means, but we each year we look at our previous year, we look at the number of critical risk events we have. So we measure what we call severity 1 events. So a severity 1 event is a safety event where someone has either been seriously hurt, we haven't had any fatal events, so thankfully we don't have to measure those, or had high potential for someone to be seriously hurt, or even worse, killed. So that's our critical severity 1 events. and we track those, and we track those numbers are just for example, by the way, but we track those to ensure that we are getting better and not worse in the number of events we have associated with our critical risks. So we do actually set ourselves a critical risk target, and the example you can see there, I think showed that 111 was the target for the year, which meant we probably had 15 to 20% more than that the year before. Set ourselves a 15% reduction, which would be the 111, and then there's the live tracker based on a rolling 12-month to show how we actually, on a year-to-date, to show how we're actually tracking against that target. So very clear, very, very visual understanding around how are we tracking against our critical risk events. And that visibility, goes to our senior leadership team and to our board, so they can get some comfort on a month by month that we are getting better and not worse. The example below just covers off 4 of our particular critical risks. Again, the graph and the trend are real, the numbers are not. But there's 4 critical risks there, and the 2 that we can see that are trending down quite significantly. One is for us, an issue we have, violence and aggressive behaviour, which is how often do we have customers threaten our people or physically assault them. And then the other one is around how many times do we have traffic management issues where someone breaks an exclusion zone. So they were 2 that we were particularly measuring. So we were very clear around what's going on with those trends. To share that with our leadership team and our board to show progress is being made in the space, and overall what the trends are. The 11 that you can see on the bottom, which looks like it's trending up and was actually to do with product storage events. So how often we had racking events, someone would significantly damage racking to the point where we thought that it needed to be repaired as a lead indicator around critical risk events. Instead of waiting for, we could say, oh, no, racking's collapsed, we haven't got a problem. Instead, we want to know how often is it damaged badly enough that we think it needs to be repaired. Those are all lead indicators around the potential for a critical risk issue to occur. That's how we sort of measure our critical risks and how we display it report it back to leadership team and board. Thanks, Wes. And then the screen here I just want to talk about is actually the safety assurance or audit process. So this is just a bit of a snip out of a what good looks like guide, which is what we actually provide to stores and to our business. And other companies have got different versions of this, I know, but this is not an audit like an ACC audit or a WSM audit or a Safe Plus audit. This is us saying these are the things that affect our business either from a legal perspective or it's part of our ACC accredited employer requirements, or it's our critical risk control. And if you look to the top right hand corner of the 2 pages that are on the screen there, you'll see there's 3 boxes: legal, ACC and CR for critical risk, and there's either a cross in them or there isn't. So this really simply helps our team members, our store managers and our business leaders understand that this is either a legal requirement, it's required for ACC purposes, or it is a critical risk control. And then we tell them about what's expected in terms of expectations. Then we give them an example of what good looks like. And then what my team does is it goes and it will go and do a safety assurance review of the location, and it's reviewing against these criteria. And from there, we build up an audit result that helps us understand how well are we doing the things that we said we need to do to ensure that safety is in place. And as I said, we're out in stores and out in our DCs, we look for those critical risk elements as part of this audit to make sure they are in place. So we've taken our critical risk bow ties, we've broken those controls down, and we say what's in control of the store or the DC, and we look for those to be in place when we're actually out there doing our safety reviews. It's these health and safety reviews are less around the paperwork and the kind of training records and all that kind of stuff, unless they're associated with a critical risk, and more about our critical risk management. I hope that made sense. Thanks, Wes. Wow, got through it. So just to finish that off, that safety assurance review then ends up providing a score for each location. That's there's about 53 questions. There's more questions for some locations because they've got more elements of risk or more elements from their operation. We then turn that into a percentage, and we've got a pass level of 85%, and each year we bump that up. So 85 last year, 87% this year. Next year it'll be 90%, and that's our way of trying to show continued improvement. But at the same time, we also review that safety assurance audit to ensure make sure that we're still focusing on the right things on the way through.
Well, thank you very much for that, Terry. I really appreciate you going through this with us all. We've only got 2 more poll questions, guys. These are quick questions. So poll number 3 is a single choice. Basically asking the question, was this webinar of any value? 3 options. You can select which one relates to you and your experience of today. Catherine, if you can launch that would be cool.
Yep, that's ongoing now.
Super. And before the next poll question, guys, that will be up on your screens in a moment's time, is a multi-choice question, and it's around ShopCare. So would you want to know more about any of our upcoming ShopCare events that Catherine will also run? So while those 2 polls are popping up on your screen, please feel free to drop a question for either Terry or any of the ShopCare team in the chat function. And if so they can answer, or us can answer, and then if there's any time left after those questions, we'll open up the lines for some live questioning.
We haven't got a particularly large group. Let's just go with live questions rather than having people having to type them, maybe.
Okay, cool. No worries. So guys, feel free to ask your questions away.
Trying the second poll as well, Wes, while we're doing that.
Cheers. Thanks. It looks like you've outdone yourself this time around. It's very quiet.
It'll be the first time we haven't had some questions, so.
Yeah.
There's still some people answering the poll, so I'll let them do that first, and then we'll get on to the questions.
No worries.
Fourth one must be perfect, Terry.
I've had some practice, yeah. I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but.
So it should just be about finishing that final poll now, which is great. It's a nice mix of different events that people are looking to understand. So I'll just share that. Yeah, so thank you all for answering the polls. That's great.
Yes,
and happy to take any questions.
Yeah. There's always a first one that needs to break the ice.
Can I ask a question?
Feel free.
And Terry, you acknowledged at the start that there's pretty a wide selection of people on the webinar again today. If you're someone that's kind of relatively new to health and safety, and there's quite a lot of language in here and new terms and all that kind of thing, where should they start?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, I think, if you're an operational person and you're trying to get your head into it, I think it's important to talk to people that have got experience in managing critical risk, whether that's a third-party consultant, whether it's just going and talking to other organisations, talking to a ShopCare or other industry bodies that are associated with health and safety. The more people you talk to, I think the better view you'll get around what will work for you. I think that I think the safety community is really good at networking and sharing. Most of us don't, try and retain IP when it comes to safety. We often use the phrase "there's no IP in safety." So I certainly think, talk to as many people as you can to get different ideas. Help people negotiate the language, the phrasing, the terminology, and the process. I showed a bow tie there that's really that's quite complex in terms of the way it looked, but I've done really simple bow ties for schools that just help schools understand how to manage risk, and they how to manage the risk of going on an excursion. So they can be as simple as you need to be or as complex as you need to be. So it's important to talk to different people to get a perspective, so you don't try and over engineer things also.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Terry. That was a great presentation. I'm just wondering, how do you get engagement across your sites when it comes to health and safety, and when you're introducing new mitigation or methods of reducing your harm?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think it does depend a lot on the type of industry you're in. As to what the right way to engage with people. but I'm going to use the consultation word because I think that's a very broad term around what's the right way to engage with people. Well, it's to consult with them, but what that looks like, I think, varies greatly depending on what your organisation does. And who you're talking to, etc. So, you know, for us, if I talk about our distribution centres, then trying to take, you know, to go and talk to our team members and say, here's the bow tie that's going to keep you safe, is not necessarily going to engage with them, because it's just more than they need to know. Most of them are kind of the tell me what I need to know, tell me what's going to keep me safe. So in that situation, when we're sort of then saying, well, here's a control, you know, we're going to put some barriers in, we're going to put some gates in, from a traffic management perspective, then it's absolutely about involving them in the process and saying, here's the plan, you know, not just suddenly go through and whack up some gates and some walkways, but actually taking them through the plan, getting their feedback, finding out what concerns them. So that consultation process, I think, is really important. It builds engagement. It gives people an opportunity to be part of the decision and the outcome. I think the other thing, though, I would say around safety engagement is, you know, I've moved my thinking quite a bit in the last, I've been doing this for quite some time now, but I tend to stay away now from safety platitudes. I'm not a big believer in things like, you know, the goal is zero or zero harm or those kind of statements, because I think that as soon as you make those statements, it's very hard as a business to fulfill and live up to it every day. Certainly, you know, don't get me wrong, I believe in not trying to harm people, and I want to see zero injuries in the workplace, but it's, I think, how you position that in terms of that engagement. And the conversation to me is always about getting people to look after themselves and each other every day to make sure they stay safe, and try and drive engagement through that collegial view around let's look after each other.
Thank you.
Terry, I think I'll ask you a question. Something that's popped up before is, how would you be able to get senior leadership, you know, to come on board from a critical risk perspective and make financial funds available? Because, you know, that seems to be one of the things that even popped up today, is saying that, you know, finances is a restrictive or a roadblock in their process. So how do you get senior leaders to come on board and understand the importance of critical risk management, lean into it, and then make the funds available?
Yeah, really good question. I didn't cover this off through the session, but the way that I've gone about driving the engagement for senior leaders, and also even around the development of critical risks in the business, is to actually look for sponsorship from an executive team. So we did the same thing when we were at Fonterra, but I've also done the same thing at New Zealand Post, and it was one of the paths I took other organisations down when I was consulting as well. So basically, when we've identified your critical risks, and for us here at the Warehouse Group, we've got about 8 critical risks. We actually, you know, through working with the chief executive and my boss, the chief HR officer, identified each of our executives to sponsor each one of those critical risks. And then we look for that sponsorship, not to be about the financial sponsorship, but to be about the people and resource sponsorship for the development of the bow ties. And then one of the key things when you're developing your control plans for your bow ties is not to limit the thinking around finances. So we're really clear when we facilitate bow tie work to say to the team, the people that are in the room doing here's what the control plan could look like. Because you'll hear people go, oh, well, they'll never pay for that, you know. And a good example is when we're doing our bow tie for light vehicles, you know, the whole thing around telemetrics and monitoring. Oh, management will never go for that. Well, that's not our decision. We're not here to say what they will or won't fund. We're here to develop a control plan. And the control plan is the control plan. It's what we recommend is needed to reduce the risk to a sustainable and acceptable level. The decision then around paying for those is management's decision, is leadership's decision. That's actually what they're employed to do. So, you know, when it comes to things like capital requests for safety items, or even just operational expenses for safety, that's what their role is. And when you take a bow tie and you explain to them where the control fits in, why it's a good idea to spend the money, you've got much more success or chance of success, because you can show the science behind the thinking and exactly where it sits in to the process of getting that approval. But it's important, I think, for us always to remember that at the end of the day, the executive team and most organisations and the board are the ones that approve the finances, and they've got the right to say no to things. I always say it's your decision, not mine. All I can do is recommend a path of action. And my view is that you don't always get what you want, but you've got more success if you've done the hard work, you've identified the risk, and you show the control plan.
Cheers, thanks, Terry.
Sorry, and that sponsorship too, having executives responsible for sort of sponsoring a critical risk gets their head into the game. They understand the process a lot better.
Okay. Any final questions, guys? We've got about 3 minutes left before the end of today.
Hi, Terry. It's Hansel here from Oyster Property. Thanks for a great presentation. Just a quick question from me. I guess for an organization that hasn't started this journey, you talked about a lot of the steps here, but where would you start? How would you start this shift in mindset and shift in focus towards critical risks?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think that to me, the first question is always, how comfortable are we with what we've got now? And what is our own information telling us? You know, do we know that we've got a risk? Do we know that we've got issues? Have we seen that through incidents occurring? Have we seen that through past, through past performances? And ultimately, you're almost trying to create a level of unsettledness in your business to try and get people to realize that we have to do something differently. If there's no discomfort, why would you move to do something different? So it's what's the level of discomfort? How do you help create that? And I don't mean create it falsely. I mean legitimately make people aware of what concerns are, where the risks are, and then hopefully that starts to engage people. It sounds like I'm saying trying to try and engage people by fear. That's not the case. I'm just trying to make sure that you create an awareness. The best safety leaders I've seen, and not so much safety people, I'm talking about the safety operation leaders, are the ones who are constantly concerned that they haven't done enough. And they're always asking the question, what else could we do? And it's sort of how do you find those people in your business? How do you help them understand where things are at and get their support to move you forward? I hope that answers your question, Ansel.
Thanks, Terry. It's helpful.
Time for one last question, guys. Anyone?
Yeah, Wes, can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, it's Shane here. Yeah, great session, Terry, and thanks very much, Wes and Liz. I see some of the courses you've got coming up, or some of the planned webinars. One is on bow ties, and is there something before Christmas you're planning there, or?
That's a potential, but it looks like more likely to be early 2022.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's good. I'll go jump on the website and have a look at some simplified versions that we could use for our teams, which would be good. Cool. Thanks.
No worries. All right, guys. Well, that's basically it. Just before we knock off, there will be a post-webinar survey that will go out. This just helps us guys to create content in the future for all of you that you'll find helpful and insightful. That's of value of you. So please, we would really appreciate you completing the survey. It's only a couple of questions. It won't take you longer, like 2-3 minutes. So please watch out for that. It will most probably hit your email boxes before the end of today. So just before I would like to go, I just want to give opportunity for Liz and Terry to have any last words.
Thanks, Wes. Look, just for me, just thank you, Terry, again for your time and the effort and your dedication to the topic. And I know there's a lot of people that's got a lot out of the time that you spent. And thank you, Wes, for doing all the arranging to make this happen, and Catherine for supporting as always. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Liz. And look, everyone, I know there's some contact details up there on the screen, including mine. Look, if there's a question afterwards that you want to run past me, feel free to flick me an email, connect in with me on LinkedIn. Whatever's necessary. You said there's no IP in this. Have got quite a bit on at the moment with vaccine mandates and other things. So I may not be the quickest to respond, but I'd certainly do my best to get back and answer any questions that anyone might have that pops up afterwards.
Excellent. Just thank you very much yet again to Terry and Liz, and thank you to everybody that came along today. Hopefully you've found this useful and of value, and then you can create some change within your organization. Thank you again for today, guys. Stay safe, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Terry.